In the case of a general increase in the supply of money, on the other hand, a lively demand will develop for those goods that were desired by the mass of the people, i.e. for goods that are just above their present standard of living. The demand would not increase very greatly for those goods that satisfy basic needs, which can be met by a limited supply, or for those that satisfy the most refined and cultivated needs, which are significant only for a limited, scarcely expanding, circle. Price increases would affect mainly the goods between these extremes, where prices would remain relatively stable. There would be no question of the increased supply of money affecting all prices equally. In general terms, the theory that the relativity of prices renders the absolute quantity of money a matter of indifference is incorrect, because this relativity is in practice continuously disrupted by a psychological process which makes the prices of certain commodities rigid and absolute. It might be argued that these doubts about the harmlessness of an unrestricted increase in the supply of money are valid only for the transitional periods of adjustment between two different price levels. They presuppose that the whole process evolves from a proportional relationship between the quantities of goods and money. It must be possible to establish this relationship at a different level, and future fluctuations could be eliminated just as well as the preceding ones. The doubts can refer only to the period of change, not to the accomplished changes, which cannot be held responsible for the maladjustments, dislocations, and difficulties of the transition period. It is impossible to conceive of any means of exchange that would not eventually enforce an adjustment, so that the money price of a commodity expressed the proportion between its value and the value of the total quantity of commodities, and therefore an arbitrary increase in money is unable to disrupt this proportion permanently. This reasoning is quite correct, but it does not prove that the removal of all limitations upon the increase in the supply of money is possible, taking into account the inadequacy of human circumstances. For the transitional period, the instability and difficulties of which are admitted would then become a permanent condition, and the state of adjustment that is attainable in principle for any quantity of money would never be reached. Reality and pure concepts. This argument may be summarized as follows. Money performs its services best when it is not simply money, that is when it does not merely represent the value of things in pure abstraction. Precious metals are also valuable as jewelry or for technical purposes, but this has to be conceptually distinguished as a primary fact from the secondary fact that they are valuable on account of it, whereas it is the first and only quality of money to be valuable. It is not technically feasible to accomplish what is conceptually correct, namely to transform the money function into a pure token money, and to detach it completely from every substantial value that limits the quantity of money, even though the actual development of money suggests that this will be the final outcome. This is not a contradiction. A great number of processes occur in the same manner, they closely approach a definite goal by which their course is unambiguously determined, yet they would lose precisely those qualities that led them towards the goal if they were actually to reach it. One phenomenon that is eminently characteristic of the money economy may illustrate this point and provide, at the same time, an analogy for the consequences of unlimited money supply with reference to individual circumstances. The striving of the individual to earn more and more money is of the greatest socioeconomic significance. By seeking the greatest possible gain, the stockbroker brings about liveliness of transactions, the adjustment of supply and demand, the introduction of otherwise sterile values into economic circulation. However, very high profits on the stock exchange can usually be realized only when there is excessive fluctuation of the rates of exchange and a preponderance of purely speculative elements. In such conditions, the production and consumption of goods, which is the ultimate interest of society, is excessively stimulated in one area and neglected in another, and in any case is diverted from the course of development which corresponds with its specific inner conditions and with real needs. Here the specific quality of money becomes a basis for the divergence between the individual and the social interest, which has previously coincided up to a point. Only through the fact that the value of things has become detached from the objects and has acquired an independent existence in a specific substance is it possible for money to develop interests, movements, and norms that, on occasion, act contrary to those of the symbolized objects. The activities of private enterprise, which are connected with money, promote the social interest of the production and consumption of goods so long as they remain merely endeavors, whereas the final attainment of their ends might undermine the aims of society. This type of situation is most frequently and decisively produced in those cases where emotional impulses strive for a final objective without being aware that all the hoped-for satisfaction is the consequence of relative advances, and may perhaps turn into its opposite when the goal is reached. I would call your attention to love, which receives its content and coloring from the desire for the closest and most permanent union, and frequently loses both when its object is attained, or to political ideals, which provide the strength and spiritual fervor in the life of whole generations, but which, once they are realized, do not bring about an ideal condition, but practical materialism, torpidity and philistinism, or to the longing for a peaceful and undisturbed way of life, which is the goal of all effort and labor, yet which once accomplished often ends in idleness and inner dissatisfaction. It has indeed become a platitude to say that even happiness, though it is the object of all our endeavors, would be mere boredom if it were ever achieved as an eternal state. Although our will drives us in this direction, the attainment of such a condition would contradict its striving, and only the admixture of the suffering that we want to avoid can give any sense to the pursuit of happiness. This kind of process may be summed up by saying that the effectiveness of some or perhaps all elements of life depends upon the concurrence of opposing elements. The proportion in which an element and its opposite are combined and cooperate are naturally variable, sometimes in the sense that one element steadily increases while the other declines, so that the trend of the development appears to be one in which one element will finally supplant the other. But as soon as this happened and every trace of the second element disappeared, the sense and effectiveness of the first element would also be paralyzed. This happens, for instance, with the opposition between individualism and socialism. There are periods in which the latter determines historical development, not only in reality, but also as an inference from ideal convictions and an expression of a developing conception of society which strives toward perfection.